Thank you guys for coming. This is the third piece of our spring parent seminars for our families. So this one is about problem-based learning and how we at MIS implement problem-based learning for your students, what it means and why it's effective and why we do it. We're going to start with this here. What do you think this is? And you can put yourself in the chat if you want to,
Or you can just
take yourself off of mute.
Yeah.
Or you can get your glasses.
It's like a building with a parking lot. That's what I say.
Yeah,
Satellite image.
kind of, but what are those white things?
Those are the garbage bins and all the plastic lined up.
Okay. Anybody on Zoom want to take a guess?
I think the parking lot is the great thing.
Okay.
All right, we're gonna play this video.
This is how we would maybe start a unit with students is, can we sneak in? We would maybe start a unit with students by presenting a mystery instead of a big buildup of today we are working with multiplying factors. And when we multiply factors, and now let's read a word problem, we would start with a mystery. So it creates an engagement hook as well.
Okay.
Strange image. And we begin by just asking, what on earth is this? We could zoom out a bit and maybe zoom out a little more. Any ideas? Well, if you've never been to Anaheim, California, you may not know, but this is where you park when you visit Disneyland. Its official name is the Mickey and Friends parking lot, and we want to know how many cars could park here. So now we're going to pause so you can make 3 guesses. First, make a too low guess. What do you think would be too few cars? And then make a too high guess. What do you think is probably too many cars? Try not to get too silly with these guesses. See if you can answer them seriously. And then, what might be an in-the-middle guess? What's a reasonable number of cars you think could park in Disneyland's parking lot? Don't worry, we don't care if you're right on the money or way off. It will be fun to look back once we know the real answer and see how close we got though. So come back once you've written down your 3 guesses.
So think of your own guesses. Having a too high guess and a too low guess with students makes it kind of, we've set up a framework to take a safe feeling risk by already making it, you're making a too high boundary and a too low boundary. You can't be wrong.
Right.
Because you're kind of thinking and just creating boundaries. So it's a low, it feels like a low academic risk entry point, even if the problem itself is intimidating. Once we've got our hook, we add more information, little pieces at a time, and how much more information we add and what type of information we add really depends on the age of the kid. If we were doing this with high school, we might tell them that it's the Mickey and Friends parking deck in Anaheim, California, and have them do the research to find more images to help them figure out what it is they're looking at. So we can scale it back for different, how much structure and scaffolding we provide is when we would differentiate.
Oftentimes with younger kids too, they may want to know several different answers, several different questions. And so you ask them, like, what do you think is the most important question? What are you trying to find out? So that they can start to collaborate to figure out, yeah, I do have all these questions, but this question may not be the most important question right now for me to figure out this particular problem.
If you click on the image.
No,
actually, you can
yeah, I went
see
the
it.
wrong way.
So this is a different view of that same parking deck. I think you can scroll and
I'm trying to, it won't.
make it even larger. It's a little bit grainier, but also all of a sudden you have lines and they're
Yeah.
sectioned off. So now that continuum you made with your too high, too low, and reasonable, you can start thinking about how you might make an actual estimate. Even if you're, we're still going for kind of a rounded number, but you can actually structure a math equation
Right.
now. So we're not going to go through the whole problem-based unit in 45 minutes.
I'm not gonna ask you.
But in this chart on the far left column, you have kind of what we would go over with the students. The questions we would be kind of the script we would use with the students. The column in the middle is the kind of cognitive exercises this part of the problem is putting their brain through. And then the column on the far right are examples of like what physical resources or tools you would see in the classroom. The kind of how. So you have the what, the why, and the how. And we've expanded the question from something that could just be a word problem on a test, how many cars can this parking deck hold, to a problem we can solve. This parking deck costs $90 million to build. How effective and or efficient will the design and usage be in allowing the parking deck to pay for itself over time? So we've kind of, now it's not a word problem that you can find on a test.
Right.
You can see the steps the students would go through, thinking of methods they can use to answer the questions. Step 2 is where we're going to spend the most time. What information are you missing and what do you need to solve it? And also with our gifted kids, especially reasonable ideas. How precise can we reasonably be, and how much does that precision matter? We're gonna have some gifted kids who will not feel like they have solved this problem unless they can calculate the exact number of parking spots in the deck. And unless we fly there and walk through, they're probably not going to know
Yeah.
to be able to calculate it from the information that's available. And so having conversations about how precise is reasonable and where does precision really matter and where are estimates okay? Because what is our ultimate goal? To count parking spots or to solve a problem? And so that's an important part.
So
of
the problem
process.
being the break even of the parking
Mhm.
place, that's the problem.
That's the problem. And we have possible products. And 3, what could you do? What could the project or the presentation be? It could be a proposal to Disney to increase their profitability.
So
It's
what
going to
would they
take you,
submit to tell us that they have this? Like, what is going to be their product for that?
or it could be a bid from a competitor on a more profitable structure or a more sustainable structure.
Right.
More accessible structure, those types of things.
Any questions yet? Anybody on Zoom land have any questions yet? Okay.
We are counting parking spots.
So then we say, like, why do we do this? Right, and we know that that the brain science says that engaging students with problems and working through problems is a way to engage and to create enduring learning. We also talk about our students, especially our gifted students, who are very used to working and getting the right answer, and wanting to continue, wanting to move on from that. And what we have done for this particular assignment, and what we do for most of our assignments, is we create a problem that allows them to build on some of those 21st century skills, but also begin to solve those real world problems so that they start to understand what they're learning and how it's applicable. doing these type of assignments also works with our students who have some executive functioning work they need to work out. So those who have working memory or who their executive function, they may need some help with that. So we are going to organize this in a way that allows them to be successful. To note, we talk about homework as well. So a lot of the times we get from our new families who are coming to MIS for the first time, and they ask about homework, and we tell them what our homework policy is. And we know that there's no correlation between cognitive growth and the amount of homework that a student does. What we're trying to do is provide them with homework and work that is going to move them forward cognitively, whether that is moving forward at home so they're prepared in the classroom, or containing all of that work within the classroom so that a teacher can see that learning process from beginning to the end.
Question about this.
I'm gonna go back, sorry.
Executive function. What, a child who has trouble with executive function, what sorts of things would you see in this assignment that show that they were having trouble? Or what would their challenges be with that assignment?
So this is problem-based learning actually supports executive function growth.
Okay.
So it would challenge their executive functions, but executive functions only grow by being challenged.
Sure.
When and one executive function in particular is working memory. That memory of not can you remember your favorite birthday party from 25 years ago, but you studied this information. Can you recall it when you need it a day later as your working memory? And the way the brain stores and cements that learning is divided into visual, speaking it yourself, and organizing it, giving it a structure. And so if you think about some ways of learning, flashcards are not going to tap into all of those categories of processing. A worksheet is not going to tap into all of them. Studying a textbook is not going to tap into all of them. Most classrooms would tap into all of those things, but it would be all of these smaller learning activities kind of existing in isolation so that by the end you've done all the things you need to do to activate your working memory. Whereas problem-based learning is incorporating them all into the same learning activity, which is going to make it more effective.
Okay, that makes sense.
And so this one speaks especially to working memory in particular as one of the executive functions.
Okay.
Any questions in Zoom land? If you still counting parking lots? No questions? Okay.
So another reason that we do problem-based learning is because of how realistic it is. Even if we've made up the problem, even if, the likelihood that the student in our classroom is going to grow up to be a civil engineer designing parking decks for Disneyland. I mean, somebody's going to do it, but we're not pretending like all of our students are growing up to become parking deck designers. But we do know is that we are preparing students for futures that don't exist yet. I mean, it may not, well, it's probably true for Ashley and myself as well. Most of us are now in jobs that didn't exist when we were students, or didn't exist at least in the way that we're doing them now. And so the idea of career readiness is kind of a false promise, because we can't predict what careers students will end up in. They probably haven't. Most of our students will probably design their own careers. They probably don't exist yet. But we do know that we're preparing them for them anyway. And so there's some skills and some thinking skills and some soft skills that problem solving supports that are going to be important no matter where our students end up. And so that kind of bulleted list supports this idea that the fundamental goal of school is to prepare young people for an unknowable future. It makes sense that students should learn how to respond to uncertainty. And so that's why we dig into collaboration and this bulleted list of all things that problem solving supports: flexible thinking, growth mindset, project management, critical thinking and analysis, communication, self-direction, perspective taking, interdisciplinary thinking, research skills, and skill transference as we learn to kind of respond to uncertainty with critical thinking. I was working with a fourth grade friend last week who came to my office quite frustrated. And he said, "You gotta talk to my teacher." I was like, well, tell me about the conversations you have already had with your teacher. Let's see what's going on. And he said, it's just not going well. I'm like, well, I'm going to need you to be more specific. And we finally got down to, I said, what do you think your teacher's job is? And he said, her job is to make sure I'm comfortable. I said, oh. Well, we certainly don't want you, we want you to be safe. He said, we always want you to be safe, and we want you to be physically safe and emotionally safe and intellectually safe. I said, but we don't want you to always be comfortable. That would mean things were really easy, and I would start to wonder what you're learning and what you're doing all day. And if you were bored. And he said, I would love to be bored. And I'm like, well, I think we're here for different reasons, friend. And he said, so are you going to talk to her? And I'm like, well, right now I'm talking to you, and we're going to get on the same page about what your teacher's job is.
Yeah, sure, next one.
And then we'll move on. We'll move on from there. And he said, well, I think her job should be to make sure I'm comfortable. And I said, well, unfortunately, friend, you don't understand what your job is. Very entertaining conversation. But as much as we want our children to be comfortable, a lot of times when we think of comfort, what we really mean is safety, and not just in the physical sense.
Yeah.
That, of course, but also we want them emotionally safe and intellectually safe. And of those things, they feel safe being themselves, if they feel safe putting their ideas out there. Those are the discomforts that we want to kind of serve and protect. We don't want them being uncomfortable sharing ideas or uncomfortable in their social spaces where they're supposed to be learning. But we do want them to learn how to cope with uncertainty and how to take discomfort and learn from it and use it to apply their skills. And problem-based learning provides that structure of the safety net and makes learning and taking academic risks safe, because it's designed to be intentionally messy, because the teacher is there to support kind of the push through the mess. And that's where a lot of the executive function comes from too, because it ties into so many of those soft skills of collaborating and managing our time and managing some of our gut reactions, slowing down to think through a process instead of barreling through it.
One of the biggest things my kids, when I was homeschooling, had, and I said this all the time, it's like the little mantra, it's the muddle in the middle. What they struggled with the most was just like not being able to figure it out right away, and being able to sit with that discomfort and power through. It's hard. It's hard for me.
It's the grit, right? We'll talk about the grit.
I have a more practical question, because I assume when you're doing this type of exercises, some of them are more on the leadership side of, just pushing through naturally, and some of them will be more on a passive seed. How do you ensure that everybody comes along and learns what needs to be learned? That's my question.
A lot of times, especially with the younger elementary student, it might be the question we ask them to take a risk with. So I noticed in kindergarten last week, I was observing the class, and they have little chicklet eggs in their incubator. And they were holding the eggs up to a special light and making predictions about kind of what stage the egg was in. And I noticed the teacher kind of based on the activity they'd done before, was asking different students different questions when it was their turn to like kind of get that kind of see-through visual of their eggs. For some students, she would start with, tell me what shapes you see.
I see.
And that's more of an observation. The student is ready to explain their observations. And with some students, she would start with, what stage do you think your egg is in right now? And then move backwards to ask them to prove it. What shapes did you see that made you make that guess? Where, you know, so kind of making a guess and explaining it, or stating your observations and leading to a guess. So kind of the structuring of the question.
I see.
So all students can get to these shapes that I'm seeing indicate my egg is in this stage of growth. But they were led to the conclusion differently.
So as I understand, that's not only like a group activity, it's like individual also for the students. Okay.
So as a teacher, I like to describe, like, I like to describe like problem-based learning as when I write my lesson plan, it's kind of like my neighborhood, right? Where some kids are going to start in my backyard, right? Because they already have a foundation. So the questions that I'm asking them, or the questions that they're asking, I'm going to be able to identify if they need to be in the backyard and need more support, right? And some kids will start in the front yard, right? They don't need as much support. They don't, my backyard's fenced in, so they can't get out if they're in the backyard.
Right.
The front yard is not fenced in. So when they're ready to go, they have no barriers to go to the next thing, to the next object, to the next part of the assignment, to the next part of the problem. Some kids may start maybe 3 streets here or 3 streets there. And then our goal is going to be get to the park where the problem is. But everybody's going to take a different journey to that part. So when we talk about like the leadership part or the passive part, we're going to figure out what journey everybody needs to get to that part. That's why I think that's one reason why problem-based learning is not so widely accepted in school, because it's hard to do.
Yeah.
And for teachers, you know, they have to be committed to being able to do this. And you have to have a system in place that values critical thinking and problem solving over product, right? And so when we have our students in this particular problem, the teachers, if I'm in this problem, if I'm the teacher there, I'm going to figure out who's in the backyard, and those students need me, right? But those students who are in the front yard, they don't need to be held back. They don't need to be in the backyard right now, right? They're going to get bored. They're going to get engaged. They're not going to want to do anything. They probably know the basic vocabulary and the concepts and the terms that are in the backyard that some of my students don't know yet, right? But they also may not be ready to get to the park, right? They also may still need to shore up some skills, or they may need a little bit of support as well. So in that case, as the teacher, as the facilitator, and we like to say that here at MIS, like a lot of our, especially when we get to middle school and high school, there's this idea or some miscommunication, I think, with some of our parents, where the teachers are not necessarily engaging our students and the students are engaging the teachers. We are asking our students to engage the problem. And then the teachers that facilitate, right? And to make sure that they are getting what they need to be able to facilitate that problem.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah.
As a teacher, it feels safest to just have everybody in the backyard with you.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a lot harder to show the growth, to show the learning when you've got, you know, some people close in the parks and front yards in the backyard, because everybody's is going to look different.
Yeah.
And I think for parents, sometimes it's hard to see
Mhm.
that
It's hard
what,
for
you know, that moving from the back to the front is a huge step,
Mhm.
you know, that is different than those kids that are already in the park.
Right.
So
And then you have kids who, you know, maybe what their strength is not is self-assessing. And, you know, if we're gonna carry the metaphor, like they hop on their bike and drive great, and you're like, you don't know your times table. You got it. And they're like, no, I already know the answer. I'm at the park. And you're like, no, no, we're keeping the training wheels back on. You gotta come back to the house.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's part of the role of the teacher too. And like the data that they would collect is, especially as our students get really more used to the problem solving model, they want to jump straight to the solution. And they want to skip the process. And most of them either think the second they hear they would have looked at the parking deck satellite image and seen the problem written out in 2 sentences and been like, got it. You're like,
But do
there's
they
no
get,
way.
do they get the right answer or is it just a guess? That's the,
Well, we know it's a guess. They think
Okay.
it's the right answer.
Okay.
It depends on who you're
you're
asking. And then you have the kids who think this isn't a possible question. Why are we even engaging? Why,
Because it's
why
not
would you
black
even
and white.
ask me
It's
this?
not black and white.
Um,
And a
and-
lot of times, we're not necessarily, this is a problem that could have a right answer, right? But sometimes we're just asking them questions that either we know may be over their head to actually get the actual answer, or there may not be an answer, like experts are still trying to find this answer.
Mhm.
The process is the important piece, right?
Right.
Taking them through the entire process.
Right.
Any questions on Zoom land? Okay, we're gonna go on.
did anybody maybe write a
Let's see if we
question
can,
in the chat?
there's no chat. Nope.
No chat. All right.
All righty.
So that was a perfect transition. And Sue, so how do we grade it? How do we do anything with it once we're learning this way? Where's the data? Where's the evidence of learning? So most assessment is kind of can be divided into 2 categories. So to just throw some teacher lingo into the mix, formative assessments are the data and information and observations that a teacher collects during the process of learning. It could be a small homework assignment, it could be a small quiz, it could just be observations that they make note of while students are working, it could be a small in-class activity. That's mid-learning so that the teacher can pivot and make adaptations and differentiate based on what they see in the messy part of the students' learning. This would be things that might just be comments on an assignment, like just notes from the teacher on assignment. It could be a grade that you see entered into the grade book. At MIS for kindergarten through 8th grade, even though when those things go into the grade book, we don't count them towards their report card grade because it's feedback for the teachers to use and for parents to track growth on the messy part of learning.
Right.
So if part of our message to the kids is you have to get messy and be willing to take a risk and mess up and learn from messing up what to do differently next time in order to learn, why would we penalize that on their report card? That would be contradictory. So we give the feedback to parents, we put the notes on the assignments or on the seesaw blocks, we put, we did a quick reading check and they got 4 out of 5 questions, right? In the grade book so that we can see that kind of narrative and story of growth. But that's why if it's a formative assessment, it doesn't factor into the grade book grade. It's visible and published and communicated, but not counted in a sense other than it counts for feedback and progress tracking. Summative assessments are those grades where we're wrapping up the unit and now it's time to put it all together, show us what you know, it's time to make your thinking visible. It doesn't mean the end of learning because there is no end of learning, but these are the grades that are going to affect a report card grade. These are the things where you kind of show your mastery of an idea or concept. They come at end of units and it's usually over, whereas formative assessment might be if it's in an English class, okay, there's a quiz on commas, and there's a worksheet on apostrophes, and we did formative assessments and put some grades in at both of those points. But now you're writing a paragraph and you have to use all of those skills at the same time, would be a summative assessment as well. Do you know them well enough to not just do them in isolation, but to use them together? The problem-based learning opportunities that end product are our summatives. And if designed well, a teacher wouldn't need an end of unit test to know if the student knows the information because they would be applying it to the problem. And so the test at that point would just become redundant. It should provide the same information that they can get from the problem. But since when it's problem-based learning in a project, you can't count up a certain number of skills and then make a percentage of how many you saw, we use a rubric. And so all of our rubrics are divided into 4 stages, kind of along this continuum. And this 1 through 4 number is what's calculated on our report cards as well. And each stage, I can't pull the person's name off the top of my head. I'll like think of it during lunch today. It'll hit me. But there is an education theorist who has developed this depth of knowledge, kind of hierarchy of critical thinking skills. And that's kind of where this is generated from, that we're all kind of at any given moment working along a continuum of critical thinking. And when we first start learning a skill, we're at recall and retrieval. We're ready to kind of parrot back what we've read, what we've been told. Once we've kind of got that locked in, we can retrieve it, we can recall it, we're showing some comprehension and understanding. We're not just saying the words, we can tell you what they mean or what the concept is, or how it works. We can do it more independently instead of with a lot of prompting. At the analysis stage, we can break something down and put it back together again. We could compare it to a topic not automatically associated with it. So if we're in a history class studying Galileo, you might connect it to your science lesson on space and kind of draw together different ideas. And then problem solving and creative application is kind of that step beyond analysis. We can break it down, we can put it back together, we can draw different conclusions. The next step would be to do something novel with it. And so
you can look at this as a continuum instead of a finite grading, right? So looking at it and you have that on the next slide, so I'm skipping you a little bit, but looking at it as a continuum. You have a question?
I had a question regarding, I mean, I totally agree with this.
Yeah.
I love it because I think it looks like the real work, you know. Nobody's giving you points for getting the right answers anymore out there. But when kids go, let's say if they choose a different path for high school or even going to college, I mean, your grading is completely different as the regular schools. How do you deal with that?
So our grading, so when we think about high school, right, we still on a 1 to 4 scale, but there are other high schools that are on similar scales.
Okay.
They don't necessarily emphasize the problem solving. They are on different scales. I mean, if you think about the IB, it's on the 1 to 8 scale, right? And so that is just a matter of a school, a particular school communicating with the colleges and universities about their scale, their grading scale, and how does that translate. That's done on a couple of different ways by the Director of College Counseling. That's done by your high school profile, which gives colleges and universities a snippet, a snapshot of the school that the student is applying from, and what are the requirements, what are the grading requirements, what is the, do they have honors, or do they have, you know, APs and those type of things. So even though it looks different, not every school, particularly if you think about schools that are not public schools, grade on an ABCF kind of scale on the percentage 0 to 100%. But with that being said, in our high school, it is more along some of your traditional. So in high school, we tried to understanding that while this is a reality that we are doing this and we know this is the best, this is best practices, we also know that there are some colleges and universities and some of the real world that hasn't caught up with what we're doing. And so we try to mix that, this problem, this way of assessing with your traditional way. So there is, in high school, there are more tests and there are more quizzes and there are more traditional type of assignments in high school. And they do have their grading more along line the numerical format that you kind of traditionally kind of see.
So any school would be able, I mean, like I have no idea about the grading in any other school, but
yeah.
So when you get your scorecard, basically you are able to explain or translate to any other school or college.
So when a student applies to a college or university, Kirsten Strytel, our Director of College Counselor, she not only sends her recommendation, but she sends a high school profile. On that high school profile, it outlines this grading scale.
I see.
And it talks about what this grading scale does. Like 1 is retrieval, 2 is comprehension, 3 is, and then it gives a percentage that goes along with that. So that when colleges see that students have a 2, and this is in high school only, this is the way we start to associate the percentages. But if a student gets a 2 or a 3, they have a percentage that's attached to that. So colleges know kind of what that looks like. It directly correlates to like your GPA, basically.
Okay.
So if you think about a GPA and you graduate high school with a 3.5 or 3.7 or whatever the case may be, this would correlate with that. Did that answer your question?
Yes, yes, there is a background. I mean, I have no idea what a GPA is. You know what I mean? I come from a different school system in Argentina, so it's not only learning about MIS, it's learning about the US
Yeah.
school system in general. So thank you. Yeah, it answers.
Yeah, but comfortably, whenever a child leaves here, then there is some sort of document that translates who we are, how we assess, and then what that means for
Okay.
the rest of it.
Yeah, I think that was the main.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem. All right. Any questions in Zoom land? Not yet. Okay.
All right, so if we're not giving a percentage-based score, because a percentage-based score would say, 70% of the information we told you, or 80% of the information we told you. How do we kind of shift our language around the numbers that they do see? And especially in kindergarten through 8th grade, I try to take the number out of it as much as possible and talk about what the number represents as far as a skill goes. Also working really hard to kind of separate feedback from identity or things that I was successful or I was not successful, especially for gifted kids. Grades and this idea of academic success, they can tie it so much to who they are as a person, which is not realistic, that it's no longer, I didn't understand this the way I needed to. I need to spend more time on it. It becomes, I am dumb.
Right.
I am not smart enough for this concept. So kind of finding ways to take our feedback and separate it from identities, who we are, is really helpful as well, which is one reason we see that 1 through 4 scale is like a continuum. You can move back and forth depending on the topic. You might master multiplying fractions, but then get into a geometry unit and really struggle measuring the angle of a triangle. And you start back at recall, memorizing the formula. So whenever I talk about grades with students, I like to reframe them with the terminology. So if my student brought home a grade that was a 2.5, what I would say to myself in the thought bubble is, my students show that they can independently make their understanding visible. They still need support or are not ready yet to expand their understanding into deeper analysis.
Right.
So we can kind of focus on the, you understood it, that's so great. What are we going to do with that understanding? Or it could be just this idea of the grade represents what you could make visible. If there's analysis and problem solving in your brain, what can we do to help you get it out on paper or in a presentation? How can we get it out of your head? And this is a conversation I have with students a lot, especially students who hate to write, is I know it. Why do I have to write it down? And I'll be like, well, for one, usually they haven't said it either. The only thing that they've said or presented is the statement, I already know this. I'm like, great, prove it. And just like this indignation that if they know it, that there is a critical academic and cognitive value to being able to communicate what you know, not just communicate that you know it. Is sometimes one of the biggest struggles for our students. And they usually the reaction is anger. Why don't you just believe me? And
I didn't understand.
yeah, I told you, I told you I could
I know.
do this math problem. Why are you making me do it? So that's part of the conversation too, is that this number represents where on this continuum you're ready to kind of independently make your thinking visible. Or if you're really good and willing to make your thinking visible, then this is also a really accurate picture of you understand this really well and you're starting to analyze with it, but you still need a little help on analysis, and that's okay, because analysis is a really tricky skill. We've got some researchers in the teal box over on the side that talk about the importance of feedback, and especially in like the memory and cementing learning for long-term recall, that it's the narrative feedback, it's the conversation and the commentary and the teacher's handwriting on the docs or on the paper, or with the older kids, the comment box on the Google Doc. That is where the learning is going to happen more than a number. Nobody sees a 2.5 and is like, got it. I know what I need to do differently next time. So like separating our ideas from the number 2 is going to cement more longer term retrieval of that knowledge. When I'm in the classroom, if I'm the teacher giving feedback back, I will actually, I will hide the rubrics and the number and the grade book so students can't see them, and I will print them out and white out all of the numbers and pass them back on paper. And I'll say, I'll hit the publish button tonight when you're at home. But today we're going to look at the feedback with all the numbers removed.
Right.
And we're going to take a look at the work, and we're going to take a look at the comments, and we're going to take out the rubric and see where you lined up with the rubric. And it's natural for our kids to try and guess. I don't tell them, what number do you think it is? But naturally they're going to try and guess a number, and they always guess a number lower than their actual score was. Every now and then you'll have a kid who's like, and still 4. You're like, well, let's look at these comments first. But most of the time, they're already harder on their self feedback, which is another reason we lean into the rubrics with descriptions instead of a checklist. If you checked off 9 out of 10 items, you got 90%. It removes that kind of narrative piece, the feedback you actually learn from. And so now we've also shifted our language around, I got it right, to more of a, this is where I was creative, or this is where it got tricky. This idea of doing well versus I got it right, because right would mean there's just one concrete answer, which is great on the homework and the quizzes and the in-class activities that we're doing building up to it. You know, they're definitely right and wrong answers a lot of the time, but it's not the goal to have something where, 2 times 2 is 4 and not 5. But that's important very early on, and there's a right and wrong, but that's not what we're looking for at the end. And it kind of takes away this idea of I'm finished with learning, because even the students who have been really successful, we're celebrating that success. And I always ask them, like, great, what about this success are you going to carry over into our next unit? What did you learn from your success here that you're going to do it? And a lot of times they'll come back to soft skills. Well, when we were doing group work, we all made a pledge to commit to different items. I think that was really good for us to break down all the tasks into different things, and we all like wrote it out, and we made a little signature of what we're each going to do. And so they learned some leadership and collaboration skills, or I managed my time better this time around, or I didn't get so sucked into research that I never read the articles. Or they've usually picked up on a soft skill that this is something they learned that they're going to try and repeat on the next topic as well.
Before we do that, could you Katie, talk about giving students opportunity to look at their assignment and then revise,
Oh, yes.
and why that's important as well.
Right. We always offer revisions, not on the little things, not on the formative assessments, because if it's, for example, your times tables that we're practicing throughout the unit until the end product, it's not helpful to have a worksheet on a times table, get 5 wrong, and take that exact same worksheet home and redo those 5 problems. The teacher's going to see these are once they get into the 2 digits, it all goes south. Next activity, we're going to have more 2-digit practice in it. Or they've got the 3s and the 5s, but when they get to the numbers like 7 and 9, they're just guessing. And so the teacher is going to use that data to improve the next activity in the messy learning process. But once we get to that thing where we're asking them to put it all together, we're saying feedback is how we learn, but we don't give them a chance to use the feedback that we provide, then we're being contradictory again. And so for those end of unit projects, we always give students just once, because they also have to learn how to finish a project, adhere to a deadline, move on even if they don't want to. So it's just one revision. It's not like this endless, as I tell some kids, especially if they have zeros in the grade book, and they're like, well, can I have an extension, especially in May? I'm like, well, there's only 6 days left in the school year. What kind of extension? Like, you're gonna come in June? Like, how far are we extending this? The semester has to end, the unit has to end, but we always allow one revision within a set time frame, kind of immediately after they receive the feedback, to apply it and learn from it. Not in May. Problem-based learning is really rooted in research, and again, we all know I hate to be contradictory if this presentation hasn't proved it, so we're not going to do a research-based presentation without a works cited and works consulted. So you can see my references there at the top. I've got some of them here. Some of them are on my Kindle, so I don't have them here. But
Can you take a picture of the books? Thank you.
down below is additional recommended books and resources for parents that tie into the same topics. And we'll link to this presentation when we put it in connections. Maybe,
Oh, it's
'cause I
gonna
realize
be,
that some of these are links that would be clicked on. Of the recommended resources for parents, my favorite of all of those is Character Lab. So I do want Ashley to click that link. Character Lab is a website developed by educational psychologists at UPenn at the University of Pennsylvania. And they make kind of these ideas of, we've been calling them soft skills and executive functions, but another name for those are character, what makes up our character and our core values. And so Character Lab is kind of about the education, the learning process for those skills, for which the intellectual and cognitive skills are important, but if we don't have the soft skills and character to go with them, then they're not going to be as valuable. And so if you scroll down on the page, they have these things that they've made called playbooks. If you go up to the top, Ashley, and click on playbooks from the top left. Yes. So they have playbooks on all types of kind of soft skills and elements of character. And if you select a playbook, maybe select curiosity. It'll take you to a page where they've kind of broken down just a brief description of what they mean by that element of character, some kind of scripted prompts to use with kids and conversation about that, ways to model it as an adult, ways to celebrate it with kids, ways to create opportunities to explore it at home. And then kind of after that initial article, They link to related blog posts related to, and this one, curiosity in particular. Below that, they'll have additional resources. They'll link to related TED Talks, related books. They'll have, for teachers, they've got slide decks and classroom activities. They've got games that you can play with your kids, additional reading. And so the playbooks kind of bring all of these things into one place. So if you're like, well, with problem-based learning, my kid's biggest struggle is resilience. So you might go to the grit playbook that's kind of about, building resilience.
So this is targeted to parents to have tools to communicate that to your own children.
For parents and for teachers, they have teacher resources on there
Right.
as well.
Interesting.
So it kind of, for these big topics, it just kind of gathers a lot of things related to the same topic in one place, and really small bite-sized pieces.
And then the other one that we really like is the creativity one.
Creativity is really hard to define if you don't feel like you are creative yourself. It's really hard to think of like, what does creative mean? And I kind of coach teachers a lot on, it's not really helpful to give instructions to say, be creative, because for one thing, it's super subjective. How do you measure it?
Right.
How do you measure it? But also the kid that was like, what do you mean like that? Could you actually define it for them? And if you can define it for them, well, in this instance, I mean, a creative story where something happens that couldn't happen in real life, well, then make that the expectation. Tell them to do that instead of saying, be creative. Because creativity is really hard to kind of conceptualize, but it is also something that we as a society value and important to problem solving, that novel, unique thinking. So that's one that ties into problem-based learning really well. The other books below, the fourth bullet point down the list, When You Wonder You're Learning, would be the book specifically relating to kind of child development and the learning that kids' brains do. If you've ever looked into Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, kind of as a person, he did a lot of deep research into child psychology and child development and what makes learning stick and what makes kids feel safe. And while, he did a 30-minute kids program, he was a absurdly meticulous person, and every choice in the shows were incredibly intentional. And so When You Wonder You're Learning is kind of the science behind Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and kind of unpacks of just the choices that were made there, or the TV show for kids today that kind of builds off the research that Fred Rogers did would be Daniel Tiger. The creator of Daniel Tiger is kind of following and using a lot of that same research and intentionality and kind of show design. All of the others, Mindset, which is about developing a growth mindset, Make It Stick, which is about what makes learning kind of long-term for us, the difference between memorizing something for a quiz and learning something for future use. Originals, which is about creativity, and Wired to Create, which is also about creativity, are all books about how our brains work in these topics from childhood and in adulthood. So when we're reading those books, we're reading about our own brains, and they talk about how children develop too. But also, if, like me, you didn't grow up learning this way, it can be like, oh, all hope is not lost. I can still be creative. It's not too late for me. So you learn about, they're not specific to child development. They all have portions that cover the development of a child's brain as it relates to these topics, but they're not specifically geared towards that. It's more about the fuller kind of lifespan of your brain on those topics.
So we have a little more time. Are there any questions from anyone? Anyone on Zoom land, anyone in person, hand raised? Who is that with a hand raised? I don't see a hand raised. Jennifer said it was really helpful. Good job. Thank you, Jennifer. Well, if there are no questions, we thank you guys and all of you for coming. Look out for our next one. It will be place-based learning. And that will be in May. We thank you guys for coming so much. If you do have any questions, you can email Katie or I. Our emails are on the website. And yeah,
Thank you.
thank you so much.
You know, that's
Very nice.
Thank you so much.
this one.